Sell beer to my kid, will ya? So we all know that sometimes revenge is dish best served cold, and this story is an old family legend. My grandmother was a pro at the long game, and this one was one of her best acts. Back in the 70s, there was a little pizza shop around the corner from their house that she discovered was selling beer to my 15-year-old uncle. She marched right into the store during the busiest time on Saturday night and yelled at the owner that the shit needed to stop now. The idiot waved her off and said it was his business and he could do whatever he wanted. He practically shoved her out of the front door and told her not to come back. My grandmother told him if he ever sold beer to my uncle again, it would be the end of his days in that neighborhood. Remember, this was the 70s. The police weren't really enforcing liquor laws as stringently as they are now, especially when it came to corner pizza shops and one woman's allegation that their 15-year-old son was getting beer illegally. Fast forward about a month, and what does my grandmother find under my uncle's bed? Beer. And she knows where he got it. She confronts him, and just like before, he says the pizza guy has been selling it to him and all the neighborhood kids. My grandmother asks some other mothers if they have found their kids with beers, and sure enough, yep, it's a thing. Now you might be thinking, so what? A couple of teenagers with beer, big deal. We all did that. Except this guy was making a killing selling beer to the neighborhood kids. According to my uncle, he was selling to kids as young as 8. This he confirmed for me when he was an adult, and even sold it to them out the back door after hours, which is really illegal since it breaks major liquor laws to do that. My grandfather then went to the cops and they played the "we'll take a report and look into it" type of stance with him. Not to fear, my grandmother was going to make good on her threat. I should probably mention that this whole thing went down in August. My grandmother threatened my uncle with life imprisonment if he ever bought beer there again, and to completely stay out of that shop because bad things were going to happen. August comes and goes, and so does September, October, November, and the entire winter and spring. Like I said, my grandmother liked to play the long game. So July rolls around and completely out of the blue, a municipal snowplow rolls down the street at midnight and right into the front of this guy's shop, backing up and smashing into it again, and once more for good measure. It then pulls back and rolls down the street like nothing happened, never to be seen again. The whole thing was witnessed by a couple of neighbors sitting on their front steps trying to beat the heat that night. They called the cops and no one could believe what they were looking at, and that there was a snowplow out in July. Clearly someone was mistaken. The mothers of the neighborhood knew there was no mistake. They knew what went down, and it was a silent secret among them. No one spoke of it, no one acknowledged it, and no one cared. My family knew the real story. My grandmother knew someone who needed money, so she paid him to help. The guy had a buddy who had access to the snowplows for the county. The rest was history. Even with all money the pizza shop guy made selling beers to minors, he didn't have adequate business insurance to rebuild. Within days, he was closed for good. Charge your own family for a drink, get your stolen fruit fed to you. This happened about 30 years ago. When I was a kid, I had a notoriously cheap uncle. They called him Joe Green because he hoarded money so much. Well, Uncle Joe had a summer house in the Jersey Shore, right on the bay in Wildwood, along with his home in Philly. His shore house was right next to the fishing charter boats, and to make extra money, he would stock up on things like bait, canned soda, lunch meat, etc. and sell it to the guys going out fishing for the day. Nice way to make some tax-free money sitting on your back deck in the morning. One day my family is down there visiting. I was only like 10 years old and thirsty. I asked Uncle Joe for a soda. Like I said, he had tons of cases stacked up. He told me, sure, leave 50 cents on the table. I started laughing and asked if he was joking. He wasn't. I had to pay my uncle to have a soda at his house. Okay, whatever. It just gave another story to share about what a fucking cheapskate he was. I thought nothing of it after paying him, but my dad felt differently. A few months later, me and my father went on one of these party fishing boats by Uncle Joe's house. After we got back, my dad pulled up to my uncle's house. I told him it was pointless. His car wasn't there. He obviously was in Philly that day. My dad just looked at me and said, I know. Now my uncle had a peach tree growing in his front yard. He would brag all spring about how they were coming along and how they were almost ripe. Well, it looked like they were finally ripe. My dad gets me out of the car, grabs a bushel from the trunk, and we start picking all the peaches off his tree. We literally didn't leave one left. He told me we were doing it because he charged me 50 cents for the soda. I left the whole ride home. The next day, my dad split up the peaches. He left a big bowl for us, gave a bowl to my grandmother, some to my aunt, etc. So a few days later, I'm at my grandmother's and she's cutting up the peaches. She would put them in a bowl with sugar on them. It was divine. When my uncle walks in, he looks so depressed. He starts telling my grandparents how somebody stole all his peaches off his tree. I'm sitting there trying not to burst out laughing as he's saying how he was so looking forward to eating them this year. My grandmother looks up and says, "Here, have some of these. Triple Skeet's father just gave them to me." At this point, I'm about to lose it. So he takes a little bowl and starts eating them and says, "They're pretty good, but mine were a lot better." I had to walk out at that point and start cracking up out on the steps. I know it's pretty petty and I'm sure some will think we were the asshole here, but I don't know. Growing up the way I did, that's just not how you treat family, especially the kids. And it's not like we really cost the guy anything. So those were the stories for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be highly appreciated. It really does help my channel out. Also, if you enjoyed this and want to stay up to date on the latest videos, then don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for listening and I will see you in the next video.